On a dimly lit station orbiting a desolate planet in the outer rim, the cacophony of alien voices filled the smoky air of the Orion's bluff. This seedy gambling den was notorious for its shady dealings, dangerous clientele, and the high-stakes games that drew both fortune seekers and criminals alike. The room was a chaotic mix of species: towering reptilian hulkraths, wiry Cythrians with their translucent skin, and even a few daring humans who had ventured far from their home systems. The ambient light flickered, casting ominous shadows across the walls as the haze of exotic tobaccos coiled in the air, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Among the clinking of coins and the shuffling of cards, a peculiar centerpiece dominated the room. Suspended from the ceiling like a grotesque chandelier was an ornate cage. The craftsmanship of the golden bars suggested it was an artifact of considerable value, but it was the occupant that drew the most attention. Inside was a tiny alien girl, no taller than a human hand, her silvery skin shimmering like liquid starlight. Her luminous violet eyes, disproportionate to her delicate face, seemed to absorb the dim light, giving her an ethereal glow. Fragile wings, resembling those of a dragonfly, fluttered intermittently, their faint hum barely audible above the din. She was more than an oddity, she was a spectacle, a rare and living trophy. The girl was known as Lyric, a member of the elusive Quillari race. Her people were thought to have been eradicated during the Great Xenocide Wars, their shimmering forms disappearing from the galaxy. To the patrons of the Orion's bluff, Lyric was nothing more than a curiosity, an exotic ornament to gawk at. They jeered and pointed, their drunken laughter echoing cruelly as she gripped the bars of her cage. Her songs, a natural gift of the Quillari, had once been the highlight of the den, melodic harmonies that could calm even the fiercest tempers. But tonight, she was silent, her heart weighed down by despair. Above the noise, the den's owner and Lyric's captor, Zorvok, lounged at a gambling table. His hulking frame, covered in crimson scales, was a commanding presence. Zorvok prided himself on his collection of rare and exotic creatures, but Lyric was his crowning jewel, a symbol of his ruthless power and vast wealth. The arrival of the human. Through the haze of smoke and noise, the heavy metal door creaked open, drawing momentary glances from the patrons. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the harsh corridor lights. He was a human, tall and broad-shouldered, his dusty jacket and worn boots hinting at a life spent wandering the galaxy. His sharp green eyes scanned the room with calculated precision, taking in every detail: the exits, the armed guards, and the tension that simmered beneath the surface of every interaction. His name was Kale Arden, a former soldier turned drifter. Kale had survived countless battles, both on and off the field, and his reputation as a sharp-witted gambler with an even sharper aim preceded him. Though he often gambled to survive, tonight, his purpose was different. The rumors of Zorvok's singing prize had reached him on a distant station. At first, he dismissed them as exaggerated tavern tales, but a fragment of hope had driven him to investigate. Seeing the tiny girl in the gilded cage confirmed the worst of those rumors. Kale's jaw tightened as he approached the gambling table where Zorvok sat, surrounded by his entourage. The crime lord's reptilian eyes flicked to Kale, a hint of amusement curling his lip. "What brings a lone human to my establishment?" Zorvok drawled, his voice a deep rumble. Kale's expression remained unreadable. "I heard there's a game worth playing here." "What's the buy-in?" Zorvok chuckled, his scaled hand resting on a pile of gleaming credits. "High stakes, human. Are you sure you can afford it?" Kale smirked, tossing a pouch of credits onto the table. "Let's find out." A game of wits. The game was Void's Edge, a complex blend of strategy, bluffing, and chance that tested both intellect and nerve. The table was crowded with players: a sly Cythrian who whispered calculations to himself, a stoic Hulkrath whose immense strength belied his careful play, and, of course, Zorvok, whose confidence radiated like a predator certain of its kill. Kale took his seat, his movements deliberate. As the cards were dealt, he studied the other players, their subtle tells and nervous glances. Years of combat had sharpened his ability to read people, and he relied on those instincts now. The first few rounds passed uneventfully, with Kale losing small amounts to gauge his opponents. Zorvok, on the other hand, played aggressively, his scaled hands slamming down bold bets. Each move was calculated to intimidate, and it worked on the lesser players. By the third round, only Kale and Zorvok remained, the pot between them growing larger with each hand. The room grew quieter, the other patrons drawn to the escalating tension. Kale's pile of chips dwindled, but his calm demeanor never wavered. Each loss was a calculated risk, a piece of the puzzle he was assembling. Finally, as the final round approached, he leaned back in his chair, his smirk returning. "Let's raise the stakes," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "I'll wager everything I have and then some." Zorvok's eyes narrowed, his claws tapping the table. "And what could you possibly offer that's worth more than your meager credits?" Kale reached into his jacket and retrieved a small, glowing orb. The stasis crystal pulsed with a faint blue light, its value unmistakable. The crowd gasped, and even Zorvok's confident HFY cracked for a moment. "This," Kale said, placing the orb on the table, against the girl. Zorvok's laughter rumbled through the room. "You've got guts, human. I'll give you that. But guts won't save you." The final hand began, and the tension in the room was palpable. Zorvok's scaled fingers tapped against his cards as he considered his moves, his expression a mask of focus. Kale's face, by contrast, remained impassive, his sharp eyes darting between his opponent and the cards. When the players revealed their hands, Zorvok's triumphant grin spread wide. "Void's edge," he declared, leaning back as if victory were a foregone conclusion. Kale's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Not so fast," he said, flipping his cards. The room erupted in gasps. It was a perfect hand, an almost mythical combination that was statistically near impossible. Zorvok's grin turned to a snarl. "You cheated." Kale shrugged. "Accusations like that can ruin a man's reputation. Unless you have proof, I suggest you honor the wager." The crime lord glared at Kale, his claws flexing dangerously. But after a tense moment, he gestured to his lackeys. "Release her," he growled. "But you'd better watch your back, human." Kale approached the cage, his movements slow and deliberate. Lyric pressed herself against the far side, her violet eyes wide with fear. "I'm not here to hurt you," Kale said softly, unlocking the cage. "You're free." For a moment, she hesitated, her fragile wings quivering. Then, cautiously, she stepped out, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting a trap. When none came, she turned to Kale, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Kale offered a small smile. "Let's get you out of here." As they left the den, Zorvok's piercing gaze followed them. Kale could feel the weight of the crime lord's anger, but he had faced worse threats. He wasn't about to let anyone harm the tiny, fragile being by his side. Aboard Kale's ship, Lyric marveled at the stars through the viewport, her silvery skin reflecting the starlight. Her wings fluttered with newfound energy, and for the first time in her life, she felt a glimmer of hope. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice tinged with both excitement and uncertainty. Kale leaned against the console, his gaze steady. "Anywhere we want. But first, we'll find your people." As the ship slipped into hyperspace, Lyric's melodic hum filled the cabin, a song of freedom and new beginnings. For Kale, it was another gamble. For Lyric, it was her first taste of liberty. Together, they embarked on a journey into the unknown, a human and a Quillari defying the odds in a galaxy full of peril.